for watching another AGR videocast. We have in studio today with us Dan Borvin from Christ Reformed Church in Anaheim. And today, back by popular demand, is Adam Kalustian from Ventura Reformed. Good to have you both here. Dan's the regular. Adam should be more of a regular. But,
it's good to be here.
You spoke today at Westminster, so we're glad you stopped in to do a podcast with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So you guys put me to sleep usually, so I had to come here and wake this thing up.
Inject some life into this crew.
Yeah.
Reformed folk are good at putting people to sleep.
Yeah, that's right. That's skill. Yeah.
So anyways, we're going to talk today about sort of how as Reformed folk and as Reformed pastors and Reformed churches, we interact and engage evangelicals who are coming in to us. Obviously, there are different challenges with that. And your challenge is kind of particular because you were in the United Reformed Churches as a minister in an established church for 20 years in Ontario. And then you went to this and did this great endeavor to go and plant a church from ground up in Ventura, California, and we hear good reports about the work. I've been there. Nice building, by the way.
Yeah.
And
the bathrooms are almost done.
Well, yeah.
Refurbished done. We're pretty excited about that.
They got rid of their second commandment violations. So
we
good.
did.
Did you really?
We absolutely did.
Yeah, there was a big stained glass up there.
Wow.
We didn't know who that was, but you took it down.
The bearded white guy.
Yeah, the bearded white guy. Anyways, no, it's great to hear the work. We thought today we'd have you on to talk about some of these things, but tell us a little bit. How's the work going?
Yeah, great. Ups and downs. I mean, the last 6 months we've had a great, after I would say a 6-month period of, I don't want to say discouragement, but a challenge of maybe not seeing as many new visitors come through as we had been, or I was kind of wondering, like a little slowdown in the traffic.
Yeah.
Although it's an exceptionally strong group and committed group that we have. So it wasn't like we were feeling hopeless or overall discouraged about the project or, tempted not to be engaged anymore. But I would say what has happened in the last 6 months, and again, it's just evidence of God's own love and power unilaterally, like obviously in ways that, of course we're there, but you can't trace it to Adam or the people of the church that this happened. There's been more activity. People attending, getting to know us. Some people, kind of a number of people that we don't really have the time to aggressively follow up with yet. So we're very, very grateful for that. People of different kinds, either coming from other churches or, to explore what we're doing, or people that are not, church attenders. So we're extremely humbled, really, honestly, by that, and pray that the Lord will bless us. Yeah, but it is funny. It's like church planting life. I guess established church too. At the same time, what's occupying our stress is the bathroom renovation. What color are we going to paint the wainscoting? That's on the wall. And, did we get the measurements right on the stall dividers, right? So I'm doing that on the weekdays too. But so really good report. We're very thankful. But again, just example of the Lord being amazing, His love and grace and truth, and us trying to stay out of the way is really what's going on. But
no, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we pray for your work. We support your work, and we really think we need guys like you who've been in ministry for a long time to go do works like this.
Yeah.
So we recognize the sacrifice in that, but we're grateful for what you're doing and pray that it continues to flourish. But in that regard, tell us how you're making it flourish and dealing with evangelicals.
Dealing with evangelicals, okay, yeah.
That's what we want to talk about a little bit. It's not like these challenges don't exist in established churches. We get people in here all the time who like something about what they've heard in the Reformed world. Obviously, we went through the sort of young, restless, and Reform movement. We've had all these movements come and go, right? It could be even back to the Driscoll movement. So people become aware of Reformed theology and, our practices, and they like it. They realize it's robust biblically. They like the preaching. But what we find is that it's hard. It's hard for them when they come in, and a challenge at times for them to understand Reformed church culture, to understand what we do, why we do what we do, and for them to stick with it. So I just want to talk about that a little bit and what you guys experience with that, and how we engage evangelicals. We want to be positive, but also we can do some good critique here of us and them.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, look, a lot of it has to do with, in my opinion, the context. I mean, if you can be open relationally and show people you care about them, at least it gives them a context to consider sticking around long enough to ask more about why you do things the way that you do it. I mean, that to me is maybe often undersold as an important thing. You just have to – look, some people come in – it's very common in our churches that let's say it's a married couple, right? The husband or the wife has done reading, has done more exploration, and they at least want to find out more and are convinced like enough to, at least for a season, suspend attending the church that they were a part of, and they want to come and check it out. Well, sometimes the other spouse is not on board with that. Mm-hmm. So imagine like how important it is in that context for a person who's, say, not interested theologically in that couple, that they make some kind of connection personally and see that we're not weird. Well, hopefully we're not weird, but also that if we're not weird, that they would see that we're not weird. Like, so, I mean, just the relationship thing is very important, and that, there's a context in which they feel warmly received and welcomed, and also not like you're trying to sell them something too. This would be another thing I think about. I mean, in my younger years in ministry more, I was less aware of this personally, but yeah, like, we're just insecure, right? So we want to grow and we want more people to come and we're desperate for them to stay and all that. Well, but that's not right. I mean, we should be confident in what we're doing. If not, we should change what we're doing. And then if we're confident in what we're doing, we should trust the Lord and rely on him to provide for us. Or if he doesn't want us, I've said, I think on this show before, it's like God doesn't owe Ventura Church Plant anything. I mean, if he wants it there, great. Like, and we hope he does, but let him glorify himself however he wants. Mm-hmm. So we just got to be faithful, do what's right, see, and if he brings people, we need to serve them and love to answer their questions with no obligations. Like, let them see if it's right for them. So there's this kind of my point is overall relational context. The first thing I think of when you say be a context in which evangelical people can explore more historic Protestant theology, be exposed to it, ask more questions about it, see if they could find their way in it. I mean, you just be a normal, loving Christian person to people.
Are you getting that, though? Are you getting people who are just seeking the community and the connections? Or are you the people you're coming, they're somewhat familiar with what Reformed is, and maybe the wife is a little more spiritually strong, has read something, the husband's coming along, or vice versa. Like what? And I want to hear from you. Like what are you guys seeing on the ground, especially in Southern California? Like we're in a unique field here, like to do the work,
Yeah. I mean, I can't remember if we talked about it before. Forgive me on this AGR, but I do remember thinking that when nobody cares. Yeah. Nobody listened in the first place. Right. Yeah. So, yeah. It's like our sermons, right? Yeah. Ask them 10 minutes after. No idea. Anyway, so I would say that, when I came from outside the Reformed churches into the Reformed churches, I could be described as an evangelical at the time, whatever. Okay. I mean, there was a big movement through White Horse Inn, through R.C. Sproul, Ligonier, like big time movement in SoCal of people from outside the Reformed churches into what became the United Reformed Churches, congregations. That was a big thing. I mean, right, Dan, your congregation was formed that way.
Exactly.
Right? But yeah. So my opinion, anecdotally, probably bears out on the numbers and stats and things if I looked at it. I'm not sure that I don't think we have the same level of aggressive outside interest from quote unquote reforming evangelicals that we had back then. To me, that was a very big and powerful movement. I don't think it's as I mean, it definitely exists, but it's not the same.
I agree.
Right.
That's one reason why coming to Ventura, my own mentality has been because of my own experience and because of my experience in Ontario, where the mentor pastor who was there ahead of me, he's the one who really did amazing work to open that historic congregation to new people like me. He really made a lot of sacrifices and lovingly and patiently brought that congregation along in that way, and give him a lot of credit and gratitude reflecting on that. But I would say because I was part of that and because that was my own experience, almost don't have to think about it. We'll talk about, how do you interact? I mean, it comes natural to me to know what evangelicals are thinking, to know what they're going through, the questions they have, the challenges they face, to get comfortable with us and to give us a hearing and eventually stay. Okay. Like, I think we almost know I would probably say the three of us around this table, and a lot of our not all of them, but a lot of our pastors in our regional classes, they could do this, like they could talk to an evangelical in their sleep, like, and do well with it.
Yeah.
To me, I try to focus more now on what's more prominent, which is people who don't attend any church.
Right.
And talk to them about God in general, the Christian faith in general, the Reformed, historic Protestant views and Reformed views in particular. Like that's been more, I said, let's focus more on that because we have to, that's harder to do. In my opinion, we're just maybe because we're not as much practiced in it. We had so many people coming to us the last 20 years in our classes that it was easy just to like exclusively focus on the evangelicals who were coming in. Like, okay, if I want to indict myself, I'll say it. Like in Ontario, there was a time when I realized that I was spending all my time with people who weren't members. I was spending all of my time in the church with the visitors who would come already prepared for some level of learning more about Reformed theology, to the exclusion of, like, let's see who's around in our neighborhood, regardless of what they believe or a lack of interest or whatever they have in our church.
Right.
What are we doing to try to be present in their lives?
That's good.
To try to. So, I mean, that was something that switched in my mind because we did create this like subculture in our classes. So like you said, ding our own a little bit. I mean, I feel, and we still fight it in not just the URC, but in all the NAPARC churches. Like we want to avoid this thing where, look, we're just selling our idiosyncratic brand of NAPARC church, meaning of historic Protestant Reformed branch church. And that's all we're doing. All we're talking about is like, well, Chris does it the best way versus Dan does it a little bit different that way versus Adam does it a little bit different that way. So I'm going to drive by 7 NAPARC churches to attend that perfect one that gets like dots all these, cross all T's. Like, I don't think that's helpful. Some of that's unavoidable. Obviously, we're going to have our convictions and argue for them. Great. Truth is important to us. But I think we don't want to do that to the exclusion of our neighbors.
No, I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? Same thing. I mean, I think his point's interesting. Like, especially, you can comment on your own with the influence of like White Horse Inn. And there was at that time, like when I was in SEM, it was like all these Calvary Chapel people were moving out into Reformed theology. Like it was a big movement. So we would get all these people coming in from these kind of churches who were interested. I do think, I wonder how much, cultural shifts, socioeconomic cultural shifts in Southern California, things that are happening just even in politics have shifted the way that people think and how they look at the church and what they think need is. And even something like post-COVID, we got all these things that have come that have presented like unique challenges. And I like what you're saying. Like we need to think, I think about this frequently here. We need to think more about like new housing development goes up. We need to get to these people. We need to talk to these people. It's not always like, and it was like that where I was in Linden, Washington, where I sat in a place where it was all a bunch of churches together. And what you would typically see is kind of a musical chairs phenomenon. Everyone's just moving up chairs, right, into a different church. They got disgruntled here and they're moving over to this church. And that was the church growth.
Yeah.
That's not always helpful. And that's not all how it was there. But that's not always helpful. That's not always healthy, right?
Yeah, at least in our history, the historic pattern was, people coming from the outside, either through basically the White Horse Inn was our outreach arm of the church. People would listen on the radio back when people actually listened to the radio live.
They still listen to Abounding Grace Radio.
They do, thankfully. But we can't count on that so much anymore. The fact that, people would just come from hearing it on the radio and then they're already 99% sold. Or like Calvary Chapel,
right?
People are kind of they're converted, they're discipled a little bit Calvary Chapel, then they get turned on to Reformed theology. They want to find a Reformed church. That was the pattern for many years, and we still see that. Much of our growth is from people from evangelical backgrounds, but we wanted to see new converts, ideally. But realistically, churches of our size, if we had even one external convert every year, that's glorious.
Right.
Not to mention 2, 3, 4, 5, that would be fantastic for all of our churches. That's what we hope to see. It's just the question is, how to get the news to them. Mm-hmm. But you've had people, in your case, in Ventura, just walking by
Right.
And the Spirit draws them into the church.
It's completely incomprehensible sometimes how it happens. I mean, I think, of course, you say all the normal things about pray for it, and then ask for it to happen. But part of it is to you be prepared, like to look that way. I mean, if you have to try to think about. So we've talked a lot in Ventura about. So think about people in your life who do not attend any church. Like I said, there are going to always be people who will be interested in us looking for a Reformed church. Of course, a lot of our solid who have become our core families, they're like younger than me. I think of them as a generation after me, so they came in the same way I initially came in. They Googled Reformed church because they heard something about Reformed church. They had some experience at their church they thought was weird, and that finally tipped them to go looking. And then they come in, they receive catechism over time when they're ready, and then some of them stay, right? So we definitely have that part. That's probably the main part of our growth, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have had these extraordinary stories of people who are from the outside in some sense. But I think both in terms of them visiting the church for why they did initially, like if people are not interested religiously, why would they ever visit our church? Well, they have a connection to us. Like there's some sort of friendship. Maybe they're going to school with, some of the kids, at the public school. Maybe they're our kids in the public school. Maybe we've met them in the community through different ways. And what we're trying to do is see who God puts in our life, who is our neighbor. We have a meaningful relationship with those people. We try to socialize with them. At some point, bring other people from the church to socialize with us in a context, not anything Bible-y or, Jesus-y or whatever. No, it's just like, we had dinner or whatever. After the school event, we went out or, So
not every instance of hospitality has to turn into a Bible study.
No, absolutely not. In fact, I find that, disgusting. And
it is possible. Yeah. It is possible just to enjoy each other's company.
Yeah, imagine.
You don't have to baptize them.
Yeah. And over time, so the idea is you have these relationships. Well, inevitably, if you're a faithful Christian, it's you don't hide it. And it's part of your life. It's part of your schedule. It's part of how you talk. It's your perspective on things, even if you're not explicit about, the foundational reasons why or whatever. And eventually they the opportunities come to have these discussions. So part of it is just being like, I'm thinking of one household in particular that's attending that. This is, and humanly speaking, this is clearly an example of, we just have a relationship. We're praying behind the scenes, and surprising to us, they're attending church. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now there's other other examples, like the guy walking by who's a Chinese immigrant who was curious about what a church was. And as I was putting out the signs, on the Sunday at the time we were renting that place, and he's like looking at me across the street, but shy. And then when I made eye contact, scampers across the other side. So I'm like, I think this guy wants to ask something or whatever. And eventually we connected and would just have coffee a couple times a week. And he had a lot of questions about America and about American religion and Christianity and what did he know about it from before. And over a period of a long time, 2 years of slow catechism and life and cultural conversation and getting to know him and his family and whatever, and him being welcomed, all those things, eventually he makes profession of faith and is baptized. And I mean,
praise the Lord.
Yeah. So, but again, there's nothing, it's definitely not anything magic about us. This is what I'm saying. Like, it's just prayer and availability and keeping your eyes open for that. Do we want that? We have to think that way. The people are there. The harvest is plentiful.
Right.
Let us at least start with having the mentality it's important to work for that. Having a presence in different ways. I mean, digital, this is why fine. People aren't listening to radio, but people are definitely as much, which they are listening to radio, but not as much. But people are they are listening to electronic content.
Yeah, podcasts.
Yeah.
The challenges though are different, and I think that's what's interesting about it. Like, we have to think through that. We have to think through the challenges. Like we were talking about Dr. Ritterberger. You may be doing a discussion with him on sort of the burned over district. We're kind of a burned over district, but I think we make assumptions that way that aren't always helpful either. Like, I have a bunch of young kids coming out here, skateboarding the other day, and, our first tendency is kick them off the property, but I go up and I talk to them and I ask them, I said, listen, on church ground, you ever been to church? Nope. You have a Bible? Nope. Like that's the culture. Like, people don't assume we're in anymore. Like, it's burned over. Everyone knows about this. They don't.
Right.
Like, they don't.
We don't have to go overseas to find people who know nothing about Christianity. They're in our neighborhoods.
Right. They're in our neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So I think your point about the relational aspect is important and can be overlooked, especially in Reformed churches, because we're so focused on our theology, our liturgy, rightly so. But we have to recognize that sometimes that can be a bit of a barrier for some people coming from unbelief or even from evangelical backgrounds. So we can help grease the wheel, so to speak, through that relational, personal connection so that that barrier is much easier to overcome than it would be if we just are standoffish in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. And also learning to speak to people who are at a much lower level of understanding or familiarity with religious concepts like God or whatever. You know, I mean, it is true. The joke about sometimes of our churches, you know, you come in, it's like a very cerebral or overly technical theological discussions that they always hear. Sometimes people have these conversations. They're not aware that the new visitor maybe standing next to them has no clue what they're talking about.
No,
and
that's
it's a huge turnoff. First of all, it's a terrifying thing, I would imagine. They say, like the literature says, it's a terrifying thing to visit a church. Like it's not your church. It's some kind of a weird closed club, whatever your level of understanding of it is. If somebody gives you the courage enough, let alone you have maybe somebody has social anxiety to overcome those things. Like a person comes into a foreign place like that, and if the first or their first impression their first season there is that it's all like stuff that's inaccessible to them and they have no way, then it's not. Then they won't stay.
I don't even like doing it as a Christian. I don't like going out and visiting other churches. Like when I'm saying I'm not preaching or I'm on vacation, it's really hard to go do. And I'm a Christian.
Yeah, and you want to be there, right?
Yeah.
In a church, right? And it's still hard to go.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I don't find that easy at all.
Yeah, good point. So I mean, talking to people, I think about in my preaching. So an example of, of another story, like a person who was not attending any church, and then we had we hired them to accompany our singing on the piano, whatever. And then, so what I did in my preaching, I always tried to think about what is that person. I wonder what that person thinks. We didn't spend a lot of time together finding out, more about the person, but little like small talk before and after services, that kind of thing, as you get to know them. And I always trying to ask myself in the preaching, how can I say things in the most understandable way? Now, I'm not saying all of the preaching should be that way. There can be an abuse of this where everything is to the lowest common denominator, and in the name of accessibility and winsomeness, you end up never challenging people or feeding the sheep who are mature and stuff like that. No, I think good preaching easier said than done, but can do, should hit all those things. But nonetheless, I was trying to communicate very clearly whatever basic things the scripture is saying to people wherever they are. And we have to think about, it almost seems weird to say this, but obviously if you're in a strong tradition like we are, and if you have deep convictions like we do, maybe it's a particular temptation to just live in that level or that world in our speech, of course, in our preaching and in the sort of the culture of the church. And, we got to watch out for that.
Yeah. I think this is where like our gospel preaching has to be very clear. Like we have to have especially I would think in your environment, but it's here too. It's like no different. Like our gospel preaching has to be so clear and accessible to the people. It's not muddied. It's not full of jargon they don't understand. It is accessible, but it challenges the professor and the child alike. They can understand it, right?
Yeah.
There is something to preaching that should be able to accomplish that. But what I'm saying is there should be a sense like when these people are walking in, wow, this is offset in a way that they have made Christ, the gospel, reconciliation with God, forgiveness of sins, something that they just sense overwhelmingly important, like when they come in. And like, I think for Reformed churches sometimes, and you're right, ding us a little bit, it doesn't always feel like that. Like, what are we trying to accomplish, I think has to be thought out really clearly in our environments that we're in particularly.
And this is why your liturgy is so important.
Yeah.
Because our liturgy is shot through with the gospel. So as I always say, even if the sermon's a total dud, you're going to get the gospel in God's greeting. You're going to get the gospel at the end in the benediction. So you can't miss the gospel just because of our liturgy. And also with the law, of course, we have the reading of the law, the corporate confession of sin. So all of our structure in the service is designed around law and gospel.
Yeah. I thought of two overall, right? So what would appeal, so to speak, to what would be noticeable to a person who is not a Christian, not a church attender, or even an evangelical for that matter? I thought a lot about the commitment of God's people to the act of worship, which has to do with, attending regularly so that there's a credible critical mass of people that they attend. Like, this is a challenge in a church plant, especially a type of church plant that we're commissioned to, which was you don't have a huge core group ahead of time, right? Obviously, the initial times that we worshiped, once we even started worship, which I encouraged our elders to forestall that until I thought we had a critical mass, because I didn't want to start worship services and we had the initial 12 people that are the start of the group. If we were in 12 at that point, I don't remember. But it's like, if you're 12 people and you're supposed to have this worship service, and let's say 3 people are out that day because of sickness or they're out of town. I mean, somebody walks in, visits a church with 9 people. To me, it's like not unreasonable for that person to go, "This is weird. I'm out of here." Like,
Right.
What are these people? They don't, So I'm saying, but the point is, in a smaller church or a church plant like ours, it's noticeable if everybody's committed and there, if everybody's not falling asleep, but they went to bed on time on Saturday. Like they're like not anxious to get out of there. They're there early, on time. They sing heartily. So I'm telling you that evangelical, so let's talk about like the non-believer. They see a commitment like this to religious things. That's unique to them. You don't see that every day. The other thing is for an evangelical who, let's say they have a problem with the worship style. So this is we could talk about this, right? One of the obstacles we face. You'll get like one might be all about it. They reform theology, this and that. That's why they're visiting. Well, their spouse might even be open to it, but the big obstacle for them is the worship style. Yeah. They're accustomed to a different style of the singing. Okay. Which some of it is just cultural, but others of it might be more substantive. But here's the thing. I'm going to tell you right now that if the congregation is singing like vibrantly, heartily, with love to the Lord, like that will make a difference. Even if the person says, wow, it's a little strange. Those songs are unfamiliar. It's not a style. Like, it will make a huge difference, right? So these are things that I think maybe they don't go noticed as much. But if we should be denying ourselves serving, like, as Paul says, you're singing to each other. With the context of public worship, you're not just singing to the Lord; you're singing to each other. I mean, there's a horizontal effect as well. So these are things that can countenance our ministry and make it more effective. And at least buy some time for some people to stick around to see, give us a hearing.
So just act like you want to be there.
Yeah. How about that?
You're not under compulsion in the congregation.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I always tell new visitors, look, you need to sit here for at least 6 weeks, 8 weeks to understand us, listen to the liturgy, understand what's happening, learn the convictions. So, typically people are in and out so quick. I do think it's important for people to take time, especially in the way that we approach worship, to familiarize themselves with it. It is a new world, though. No matter what we do, it's going to rock their worlds in many ways. Yeah. And I mean, there was the big movement years ago of everyone talking about being missional. Remember that? Being missional. Oh, yeah. Everything was missional. And we don't want to fall into that either, like in the sense of like trying to adapt it in the sense of making it something that it's not. I know you would never do that, but
it turns the church into a consumer relationship.
Yeah.
Like what can I sell you that you're looking to buy?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so let me push back on that a little bit.
Let's do it.
I mean, missional, right? So that's the way you're using it. Of course, it's a way to term. Yeah,
it became a pejorative.
Missional in the sense of that you compromise biblical principles.
I'm just thinking
in order to appeal to more people, which we all agree is wrong.
Yeah, and I'm thinking more of when I know Willow Creek and all those models are old now, but it was the ideas behind it. How do we make the Harry and the Mary feel welcomed here.
Right. So
They designed
everything
the
which-
church for lost people.
Everything became orchestrated around how to please Harry and Mary.
Right.
And like, okay, I get that. Like, and I get the relational aspect. I think you're absolutely right about that. But at the same time, it is the differentiating of ourselves that is part and parcel to the witness itself.
Sure. In
And
our context, it is, yeah. But I would just, yeah. I mean, to me, the problem with this approach you're talking about is that it's the tail wagging the dog. You put the principle of what you do in worship and why you do it, number one, and there's no number two. It's like you do it for the glory of God, and therefore you do it on principle in the ways that you do it. But I'm saying if that's in place and you don't compromise on that, then you do want to think about making things as accessible as you can within that thing, not making things unnecessarily an obstacle or foreign.
Right.
That's all I'm saying in terms of missional. And to be mindful of the fact that you have different kinds of people and that you have a responsibility to be seeking them in some aspect, which would include, of course, being intelligible to them to the degree that's possible, apart from, say, their spiritual blindness, right? But I mean, to the degree that's possible, being accessible in language and
But
whatever.
this is where I think that the people have to be equipped to think this way. Like, it typically, especially I would think in a church plant situation, it's a more unique. But, everything falls on the minister, and the minister has a perception of things that not always the people share, right? So especially, and maybe I should say in a mission work, you want the people on board to understand the particular responsibility and role they have in embracing the visitor. But it's not just like that in the mission work. It's here in a larger church. Like,
absolutely.
we have to think about that. I often find that, I know I hate to say it, but okay, you're right. We have our doctrinal distinctives. I think you're right. That's how we've tried to sell ourselves. I think that's so right. And there's things that I think are absolutely right about that. Like, I'm not ashamed about who we are, but I also understand today we're like in this culture that wants everything authentic. Mm-hmm. We're on church burnout. We've seen so much hypocrisy in the church. We've seen so much abuse. We've seen so much junk go on. People like have a hard time trusting the thing. Mm-hmm. Like that's just part of the reality, especially in Southern California. So it has to be a sense that not just, hey, we're glad you're here, but a sense of also from the people of like Acts 2 again. Like we're investing in these people, like fellowship and breaking of bread and prayer. Like those kind of things have to be thought about, I think, especially in our environments, because everything is so transitory here. Everything's moving. Everyone's fast moving. And no one knows how to slow down and enjoy life as the church is designed for it to be. So they need to see that again and how that looks and how that's valued, especially in a family-oriented thing where I don't think people get that much anymore.
Yeah. So so that just makes me think of something we've talked about in Ventura is we want to, as church members, spend time with each other outside of the worship services. Because you quoted from Acts 2, that's funny. I mean, the passage you were quoting to me is like the liturgical passage. I mean, this was like their worship services, but the context also says they were gathing, right?
Now, I'm not sure
homes.
the breaking of bread there's the supper, but we'll talk.
You may not be sure, but that's what it says. But anyway, but the idea that there is also there that they would break bread in each other's home, and I believe that is a reference to what we're calling, broadly speaking, the fellowship, like the spending time together outside of church. Yeah. Now, different churches have different cultures of like that. So, for example, like in Escondido Church, a big part of that is that many of the parents have their kids in a particular Christian school. Yeah. I mean, those families. Yeah. So I enjoyed this experience in Ontario where I served. Like, the Ontario Christian School was one of their they found that school when they founded that church 100 years ago. And so you had a lot of people who were completely, like the people in the church were completely intertwined with the other people in the church's lives, not just on Sunday or church programs or church institutions or whatever, but I mean throughout the week and everything they did, and it's all okay. Now that came through a certain way of looking at life and doing fine, but great. And one of the positive effects it had is that definitely if you came to that church, you could you could find a way to be part of that community. And there was a powerful mutual like connection among those people, that bore a good amount of fruit. Like if you're not in a church has that same sort of thing, and maybe a little bit more of a commuter context in some of our churches and what have you. I mean, it takes a lot more deliberate thinking about how I can find and spend and prioritize time with other church members outside of Sunday services. I think it's important. I don't know how you have meaningful relationships with people that you see once a week only.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's tough. So how do we apply that? I think that makes it a better context for receiving all kinds of visitors from outside our churches, whether they're church people or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that's important, but I also think about somehow we have to do a job. Now I'm thinking back to the pastor hat, like of communicating why these people really need this. Like it's important for especially the newcomer, anyone coming in, that it's clear to them that we've communicated this is necessary for you and why it's necessary. And I don't know, I guess I sometimes struggle with whether we're always doing that so well. But that's where I get back to the clearness of the gospel preaching liturgy. It's all important. But okay, somebody comes in from Ventura off the street. Do they get a sense like, why do I need to be here? Like, what is, how do we communicate that to them? I believe strongly in the means of grace. I believe strongly in the means of grace that people need to sit under it and need to receive it. But it's really hard to communicate that to others, that they need that.
Sure.
And
well, I mean, the typical person, they don't, I suppose a person doesn't believe in God. So why you start with I would say you just start building you talk, not just in the sermons, and also not just in the other information you're putting about. If you're talking about a person who's actually attending the church, I probably notice, I have the liberty to do this, or the luxury to do this because it's a smaller group. I kind of can get an eye. I know if I don't recognize somebody, I maybe, of course you're profiling a little bit, but okay, sue me. I mean, I'm trying to, for example, before I give the call to worship near the beginning of the service, I might give a little bit of an explanatory sentence about what that is and why that matters.
I noticed you did that a lot when I was there, and I thought, in your context, I think it's necessary.
Yeah, probably the Sunday you were there when I did it, I'm assuming that there was somebody there. Probably, if you noticed it, that I was doing it more than you might have expected me otherwise, it was probably because I thought, at least, there was somebody there that.
Well,
maybe
I was there.
Yeah, it was Chris.
So I needed.
Yeah, exactly.
He didn't have a clue what was happening.
He was concerned for me. Like he doesn't. He really never gets it.
Yeah, this guy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let me help you out with that. I'll put other things in the message for you. But I bet it'd be a good example.
I think you had an altar call that week.
Yeah,
Chris,
you
right?
were really
exactly.
concerned.
Yeah. Well, we did. There was something we did. I don't know, a couple summers ago, where we had like a picnic outside after, and we tried to invite, our friends who were not church people, and one of the people who visited, it was actually from your church. An elder and his wife came up. They just happened to be in the area, so they visited on that Sunday. And they came up to me after and said, we noticed you did a lot of do you do that every week? Do you, what they said, a lot of explaining what you're doing next in the worship service and why. And I said, no, I don't. I did it particularly today because of this, but I will feel free to do that at times if I think it helps. So, so you're saying, how can we do a better job? Again, be aware and put yourself in other people's position and serve them.
Yes.
This is our job. What do they need? Bring them Christ wherever they are, try to extend him to them.
Okay. Coming back to the evangelical, Danny comment too. They come in and they say, listen, we like the preaching, but your music's awful. Your liturgy's boring. My kids, there's not enough programs. Seriously, you got a small church. You got a small church here. I down the street, they're running, all kinds of day activities. And, why in the world how am I going to answer somebody like that? Because it's typical down here. It's typical. This is what we get. And then, you come into a Reformed church and sort of stereotypical is this is going to be a lot of more doctrinal content. It's going to be, heavily theologically engaging. There's going to be a lot more brain activity. Usually one of the spouses isn't on board. Maybe one is, right? And that's it. So, that's the kind of person I think I see quite a bit of. We do get a lot of people who come in off the streets, and they don't ask those questions. It's really interesting. Or Roman Catholics.
Religious people
Roman Catholics don't even ask those questions.
Yeah.
It's the evangelicals. So, and any portion of our visitors are probably going to be, in our day, evangelicals. Mm-hmm. So, how are you dealing with that? How are you guys dealing with that?
Well, I think it's like you said, it takes time to grow accustomed to it. Maybe if you're coming from an evangelical megachurch that has a professional praise band or a professional orchestra, our simple music with a piano or an organ might seem less than that. And if you're coming at that church has, Hillsong music, our Psalter hymnal might not be very exciting to them. But I think encouraging them to come back, to grow accustomed to it, to learn to appreciate the beauty of those things, we can coach them in that process. But we're not going to compromise. Mm-hmm. We're going to sing the Psalms. We're not going to trade out the Psalter for Hillsong. Mm-hmm. And if that's really what they want, well, they'd be more comfortable in those places. So this is why, as we said before, trying to connect with them in other ways so that these aspects that are more difficult for them, they can be overcome because I love the preaching, I love the relationships I'm building here. I think I can get used to the music. And then over time, they'll be won over. Those kind of things, the relational stuff can help them cross these barriers. It might take a little while.
Yeah. So that's true. And that's a really good list. So let's go down a little bit. I'm going to say some things about singing too. So I'll tell you what I think about that. So I think you have to positively express to them when you're leading worship as a pastor in our churches, because we lead worship in the church. We don't have a side.
There's one worship leader. He is the pastor.
That's right. Yeah. So all right, which means we announce the songs. So what I would say is pick them.
Right.
And what I think we should say is, or be mindful of, is that for religious people, evangelical-ish type people who might find the songs unfamiliar or unattractive, unappealing, whatever, I think we need to speak intelligibly to them and positively when we introduce the songs about the differences between the Psalms, for example, and what they're used to singing. Now, I wouldn't want to word it that explicitly, but what I mean to say is I would want to point out in the Psalms, look at these, like I'll say things relatively often, like I'm reading this Psalm, introduce a Psalm, we're going to sing this. Look at this line, the third stanza, and it's like God's horrific judgments against somebody.
Psalm 139.
Now, I said, maybe you can make kind of like a self-reflective, honest comment and go, man, I read that. Wow, it's hard to sing that, but man, these are the songs that God gave us to sing. They reflect His holiness. Jesus sang these songs, and all right, like let's pony up. Yeah, boy, it's funny. We don't want to get into the church culture where we kind of sanitize and neuter these songs that God gave it. Okay, that's longer than I would do, like
right.
In a service. But some things like that, where hopefully you're getting the person to know that you understand how they might feel about it, but also you're speaking positively of why it's important and then what's behind it. And like I said, then if everybody's like, boom, like let's sing this, then that is, we should be like those. My brother-in-law one time in our church, he sent me this thing. He's like, Adam, this is how we should sing. And it was like an a cappella singing. We have a piano in our church, in case you're wondering, because you're, in that, but whatever. But I'm just saying, he sent me this great video of this, soccer fans in a pub in London, like singing vigorously for their team when they scored or whatever. And he's like, this is how we should sing. I'm like, absolutely. Absolutely. Like without trying, like being showy, just because our heart fills with the truth and love of God, and it's our responsibility to sing to Him well and sing to each other well. So I mean, in this context, that's how I think you can help break down some of the barriers over time, like you said, to the singing that they're not familiar with. I mean, and you have to tell people, Like, look, if the singing is so different
Yeah.
from the Psalms of the Scripture, maybe we have to rethink
Yeah.
all the singing that's, that is so prevalent. So singing, I mean, that's one thing that I think about.
Right.
It might help. Just some comments, but again, you're not on the attack.
I get you. My experience though has been when people come in picking it apart that way, they're not the ones who stay. What I am seeing, at least down here, especially in Southern California, is we're getting a lot of people who are actually pretty hungry for something more meatier.
Yeah.
Like, we've been through the sort of mile wide, inch deep stuff. I don't think is as attractive as it used to be to people. I just think the culture's, the direction it's gone, the difficulties people face, the hardships, the post-COVID. I think people are searching for something more meatier. They want something more of substance. They want something more doctrinal. But it takes, like Dan's saying, my experience is it's just going to take time. It's going to take time for them to be detoxed in certain ways from what they've experienced if they've been in evangelicalism, to then come into us. And the word being heard takes time too.
Yeah.
Like Jesus talked about hearing just as much. And, we talk about focusing on how to preach, what to preach, making sure we're this and that. Jesus gave a lot of attention, take heed how you hear. If you can get people to seriously invest and listen, just listen for a time to the preaching of the gospel. If we are clear and we are being expositional in the sense of we're working through the texts and we're preaching them as God gave them, in God's people, there will develop a hunger in those people. Like, it will happen. And the sort of side matters, they begin to become less and less. That's my experience. But, I think you have to use wisdom also in the kinds of people that come to you who, I'm not saying you don't invest in all of them. Of course, you do the best you can. But there are those who you have to use wisdom because they're searching with the right questions and for the right thing.
Yeah, yeah. And then not everybody that comes, it's the right time either. Another
Right.
thing you learn is that mentor pastor of whom I spoke in Ontario, he used to always say that when receiving people from the outside of the Reformed churches, he noticed that you would have people who would visit and it just was too much for them at a certain point. And
Right.
then they would leave, and a certain number of them would come back a couple years later and they would never leave.
I've seen that.
Right?
Yeah.
I've seen that.
So he talked about, in that context too, then the importance of not being either overly disappointed, or also not salesy toward people. It's
Right.
like, look, it's let's humble ourselves. Let's serve people the best we can. But it's the Lord's work. Like, if he wants them here and if whatever, we have to be ready. But we can live with people who are not ready to be with us, and you have to let them go. And maybe they're better somewhere else for a time until the Lord may decide to bring them back when they're ready, so you don't have to sell too much or put pressure on people or be overly discouraged yourself when it's not their time.
Or panic and try to change what we do in order to accommodate
every
these people.
Tom, Dick, and Harry
Right.
that's coming through. Yeah. And an elder who said, Adam, you got to, try not to take things personal. I mean, easy to say, right? And he wasn't like coming down on me, but he just said, sometimes like we take it. Now, sometimes we should take it personally. If there's been some dereliction in duty or sin, or you didn't serve people as well as you should and you weren't faithful, fine. Then you need to repent and grow. But he's just saying, even in that context too, we believe the gospel, and you have to, don't take it personal. God is God, and he's, I mean, we can be confident he's going to glorify himself. That's the most important thing. Great. Like, so we can be servants, humble servants.
Yeah. I also think we need to think about the next generation. This is just me. I don't know. Did you guys watch the movie with, I can't remember what it was called. It was the Calvary Chapel story with Chuck Smith and Lonnie Frisbee.
Oh.
Did you watch that movie?
I didn't watch it, but I know the movie you're speaking of. Yeah, I've seen the ads.
All the methods were wrong, in my opinion. But it was interesting that Chuck Smith at the time down here tapped into that entire hippie movement.
Right.
And in almost overnight, all of them were coming into the church. And so I didn't, obviously there were all kinds of abuses with Lonnie Frisbee, and the movie, it's a movie. And how accurate it was, I don't know. It kind of captured, why they had a split and how all the Foursquare stuff started and all the weird stuff. But it is interesting that, somebody was able to talk to that next generation.
Yeah.
And somebody was able to engage them in a sense that they felt this guy wasn't against me.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for us.
Yeah. Well, you raised now you raised that too earlier when you said, what about the people who come into the church from a big youth group culture church type?
Yeah.
Even I've noticed even people come in that aren't a part of that somewhere, but maybe their kids are having some trouble, and they're coming looking for whatever reason. They have some expectation that you have a big youth this program, this and that would be the solution to. So now here's an interesting thing where I find that, we can go one of two ways astray. One way of going astray is capitulating to what I think is a lot of behind the youth group culture today, which is basically lowest common denominator, dumb everything down. Basically the point is to keep them entertained, and it's like a video, turn church experience into a video game, into a party. And what it does is it anesthetizes people to spiritual truth. It doesn't help them.
Right.
Whatever you sell people on is what they're going to continue. Everybody always says that's what they're going to continue to look for. And this is why we have such a consumer culture in adult church in the West, is because a lot of these people came to the faith and came to Christianity by being sold a bill of goods, catered to them from day one. And as soon as they're bored, they're gone. Right. Like you said, to the next church earlier, or out of the church completely, because they realize there's no substance to it. Fine. Right. So that's one temptation, capitulation. But the thing is, no, what you're saying is true. Look at these young people. What needs do they have? How can we be present in their lives? Help them. Talk to them.
We've got to.
Well, okay, but I want to say this. Look, a lot of our churches have some kinds of youth programs. How you describe it, whatever, is not all the same. But sometimes the Reformed churches get, and I don't know, who would hear this and it would make a difference. But sometimes Reformed churches get a bad rap as if they don't do any kind of what some people will call youth ministry. Yeah. It's not true. I know that. I don't know much about what's in Anaheim, but I know, for example, what happens here. I've known over 25 years or more than that now, because I was in seminary before that. But I've been around this community enough to know a lot of even the individuals who spend time in instructing the kids, either in the Sunday school classes or in the activity nights that they have, or on the little Bible lessons that they have. I know this network that we've come into. So I grew up evangelical, thing. I was a big involvement in youth ministry and youth camps and whatever. Now some of that stuff, I look back, I go, not so good. Other parts of it, huge, important part of my spiritual development that happens in the Reformed churches. We have these organizations that have camps, they have retreats. The ministers speak at them. These wonderful committed volunteers run these organizations, serve from the churches to spend time with the youth. This is great, where it's more balanced, than you have often in the evangelical world. And so I'm saying, on the one hand, we don't want to capitulate to youth group culture, but on the other hand, we haven't neglected that.
No.
Right.
And maybe sometimes we have. And if we have, let's do it thoughtfully and re-engage with the youth. And I think there will be what did they use? Onboard is the cool word. There would be more onboards for kids to feel in the church. Now, some people you just have to tell. I'm going to give you an example. It was a family that came, and they're like, my kid will never come here. They were scoping it out because their kids were having a problem in school. They said, you're too traditional. My kid will never come here. I said, this is the problem. Okay. The problem is you're setting a bad example. Why do you want your kid to be a good person and obey God and whatever concept of it you have? You don't even attend a church, number one. Number two, you want them to come here and us to cater to them. This is the problem they're being catered to. This is why they're acting like knuckleheads. And now, some people you have to tell them that.
Yeah.
And, when they sit there smug and stand in judgment of you because, you don't fit their thing. It's like, well, what do you mean? I can show you countless kids in these broader big youth group churches. I had a guy, when I came to Ventura, first thing this guy tells me, nice guy. I get invited to a birthday. My son gets invited to a birthday party because his cousin was friends with this guy at Ventura. Okay, fine. We go there. He says, why are you here? Oh, I'm a church planter, pastor. He's like, we're going to have a terrible time in Ventura. I love the story. This is one of the first guys I met who was in Ventura. And he's like, you're going to have a terrible time. It's going to be very hard for you. I said, you might be right. Why do you say that? He said, look around you, man. He goes, what are you going to waste a Sunday going to a church service? He's like, You got the mountains right here. You got the ocean. You got, Santa Barbara 45 minutes away. You got whatever. He said, he goes, not even professional sports teams can last here because it's too amazing, too many things to do. Like, let's go to church. I'm not coming to your church. I'm like, really? He said, you know what? Actually, so this is a guy, he said he tells me he's borderline anti-religion. Okay. So he says, well, let me tell you what might work for you. Okay, please tell me. Thank you. So he's like, when I was young, growing up here, I used to go to the youth groups, and I would go because of the music and the chicks. So he's like, maybe you have a chance. He basically said, maybe you have a chance. Like if you get the really good, like rock stuff and whatever they're listening to these days, and bring it from the outside for your youth events, and then they get like their social thing on with the girls and stuff, then maybe you have a chance to build your church. And I'm like, wait a minute, really? So like a bait and switch? He's like, no, not bait and switch. I would switch. But he's like, I hated the Jesus part of those meetings. Like I hated it. I just tolerated it. And so this is my point. Like you cater to that. What happens? This guy's totally inoculated to the spirit. He deliberately only went for those social things, hated and resisted the rest of it. And as soon as he got old enough where he could do his own social business outside of like anything religious, he's out of there. And he was kind of darken the door of a church unless, the Lord changes his heart ever again. So these are, we have to be careful about that, right? The capitulation to that culture, but we have to show the people, like talk about what we do, how we view our kids, give them the alternative, whatever. Yeah. I mean, I think that's helpful.
Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, these are all, complex challenges of being faithful in our time, but also, being wise in how to minister in light of the context we're in. Like we have to think about that. So any other thoughts, Dan?
Pray for the church plant in Ventura.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Please continue to pray.
Good to
we
have
appreciate
lively
it.
Today on the program today.
I got more to say. That's it. Come on.
I'm ready to keep going. No, we'll pray for your work, and thanks for coming on today, and we pray it continues to go well.
Yeah, thanks guys. Appreciate it.